Hello, I'm Dennis O'Hare, the host of Morning Edition on 90.1 WABE. Welcome to the Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk-Young debate series originating from the studios of Public Broadcasting Atlanta. This is the debate among the candidates for mayor of Atlanta, and there are 11 of them. This is a nonpartisan race to fill the seat being vacated by Atlanta Mayor Kasim Reed. His term expires at the end of this year. So let's meet the candidates, and they are, in alphabetical order, Peter Amon, who is a former director and advisory partner for Bain & Company, a management consulting firm. In 2010, he began serving as Chief Operating Officer for the City of Atlanta under Mayor Kasim Reed. Rohit Amanamachi is a civil engineering graduate from the Georgia Institute of Technology. Keisha Lance Bottoms has served as an Atlanta City Council member for 8 years and previously served as Executive Director for the Atlanta Fulton County Recreation Authority. John Eves served as a Fulton County Commissioner since 2007. He was elected to his third four-year term in 2014. Vincent Fort has served as a state senator from District 39 since 1996 and has served as Democratic whip since 2011. Kwanzaa Hall was elected to the Atlanta Public School Board in 2002 and has served on the Atlanta City Council for District 2 since 2006. Cesar Mitchell is an attorney and he has been City Council President since 2010. Mary Norwood was initially elected to the City Council in 2001 and served 2 terms before running for mayor in 2009. She was re-elected to the council in 2013. Michael Sterling is the former executive director of the Atlanta Workforce Development Agency and former senior advisor to Mayor Kasim Reed. Kathy Woolard was the first woman to become president of the Atlanta City Council and has supported organizations such as CARE and the Human Rights Campaign throughout her work as a nonprofit executive. And Glenn Wrightson ran for mayor in 2013. He lives in Grant Park. And now let's meet our panelists. Greg Bluestein is a political reporter with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Keith Whitney is a reporter with CBS 46 in Atlanta. And Michelle Wright is an anchor and reporter with WSB Radio. So today's debate will consist of 3 rounds, and for more information on all the rules for each round, you can visit atlantapressclub.org. And we begin with what we call a speed round right before we get into the formal rounds. I'm going to pose a question that all of the candidates will have just 30 seconds to answer. And the question is the same one for each candidate, and Keisha Lance Bottoms, you get to answer the question first. This week, 2 former City of Atlanta contractors pled guilty to federal bribery charges. Want to know what specifically, we can get into details later, but I want your punch list now. You have just 30 seconds. What specifically would you do as mayor, either through executive action if you could, or through ordinance passed by council, to make sure that something like this doesn't happen again?
Thank you for the question. The first thing that I would do is ask that a complete audit be done of our procurement department. I will also ask that all elected officials and those working in sensitive issues in procurement be required to file their tax returns along with our financial disclosures, as well as move our current procurement process to an electronic system.
All right. Thank you. John Eves, you have 30 seconds for that question.
So first of all, I led Fulton County for 10 years and it was corruption-free. So as mayor, I would set tone at the top. I believe it's important that the top elected official has a series of transparency and accountability to constituents and integrity. So tone at the top. Number 2, an ethics ombudsman, someone who is going to be advocating on behalf of the constituents. And then thirdly, I think it's important for us to have an auditing effort. So at Fulton County, we had a strong auditing department, and that department pursued a lot of proprieties, and so we found that to be very effective, so I'll bring that to the City of Atlanta.
Thank you. Michael Sterling, your turn, 30 seconds.
Yes, as the only former federal prosecutor in this race who's actually put someone in jail for violating the public's trust, I've laid out a very clear 5-point plan for how we will address corruption going forward in the city. First, I will require anyone who lobbies City Council, City Hall, or the Mayor's office to register as a lobbyist. and to report their lobbying activities with the city's ethics department. That will increase transparency. I'll work proactively with the U.S. Attorney's Office to come up with mechanisms that protect and mitigate against any violations of the public's trust in the future. I'll make sure all of the city's accounting and spending is made available in an easily searchable format for the public. I'll incentivize whistleblowers in City Hall for those who see people violating the public's trust, so they'll turn those individuals in. But we'll make sure that we increase transparency in City Hall.
Thank you very much. Vincent Fort, your ethics punch list.
Yes, sir. Dennis, this past legislative session, I introduced a bill to create the position of an Inspector General. This Inspector General at City Hall would be as independent as possible from the Mayor's office or City Council. They would, in effect, be a special investigator, a special prosecutor who would be able to investigate and refer criminal activity to a prosecutor. That is the core element. Unfortunately, people at City Hall killed that bill in the legislative session. We'll get it done this time.
Thanks a lot. Kathy Willard, your turn.
Thanks, Dennis. First, I'll convene a group of public and private experts in procurement and ethics and compliance. We'll review everything about what went wrong and what our processes are to make sure that we're doing best practices for procurement. But we'll do it top to bottom in every department. We've got to look at how we let contracts, how we do performance evaluations, and so on. And finally, I'll make sure that we reduce campaign contribution limits to $100 per person, per company, so that we can get money out of politics at City Hall.
Thanks very much. And if you've just joined us, the question is, what would each of these candidates do to increase ethical compliance in City Hall and in city government? Each of them has had 30 seconds so far. Kwanzaa Hall, it's your turn.
Thank you, Dennis. I'm calling for a top-to-bottom review and audit of every contract and everyone affiliated with any contract in the city of Atlanta. That will ensure that we have a higher level of transparency, and also will put everything online to make sure that our citizens know that we're spending their tax dollars wisely.
Thank you very much. Glenn Wrightson, it's your turn.
Glenn Wrightson, I would bring a component to City Hall that we don't hear much about, and that is sensibility. And we would have checks and balances, and it wouldn't, I don't see how it could be that difficult to discover where there was fraud and under the table and backroom agreements being made. Follow the money. Just follow the money, bring sensibility, incorporate many of the suggestions the other candidates have made here.
Thank you very much. Rohita Manamanchi, it's your turn.
Thank you. I think it's time for the city processes to move into the 21st century. It's really time for that. So what I would do is bring a process through the procurement process to have all the submissions for contracts through a Google Drive where anyone can look at them, they can comment on them, and they can hold their city officials accountable for decisions that were made or not made. And so instead of having one inspector general, we could have everyone in the city effectively be an inspector general.
Thanks very much. Cesar Mitchell, your turn to answer that question. You have 30 seconds.
Thank you, Dennis. As City Council President, I've already spoken up and asked for the City Council and the administration to put a moratorium on all contracts that don't expire until this time next year. That's the way we can increase confidence right now in city government. As mayor, I'm going to appoint and actually make sure that this role is an independent role, an independent compliance officer, independent of me, independent of the City Council, to ensure that we can increase confidence in city government and eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse. And the procurement process is going to be online from procurement all the way to the signature at my office.
Thank you very much. Mary Norwood, your turn.
I will completely overhaul the procurement department. I will bring in a new procurement director who will be a cabinet level position who has run procurement for a publicly traded company where every single procurement that has been done has been publicly scrutinized. So I will completely change the system. Secondly, I will make sure that that position is cabinet level, and I will not and did not support moving the operating departments into the procurement office. I felt it was too much control several months ago and voted against it.
Thanks very much. And finally, Peter Raymond, your turn to respond to that question.
Thank you. The first thing I will do as mayor is to have an unrelenting focus on ethics. I will personally train in groups of 100 or 200 all city employees on my expectations of them, not only that they abide by the ethics code, but that they have a positive duty to turn people in. We're then going to have a series of initiatives, from posting all of the contracts and checks written by the city linked to who owns those companies, to audits of all emergency procurements, to many of the additional steps that others have talked about this afternoon.
Thanks very much. And for those of you just joining us, this is the Atlanta Press Club debate in the race for mayor of Atlanta, coming from the studios of Public Broadcasting Atlanta. And we'll now move to our formal first round, and in this one, each candidate will be asked one question each by the panel of candidates, by the panel of journalists that we've assembled. The candidates have 60 seconds to respond to the questions. And Greg Bluestein, you get to direct the first question to Cesar Mitchell.
Yes, Councilman Mitchell. The City of Atlanta and the State of Georgia are preparing a pitch for Amazon's second headquarters, a deal that could bring 50,000 jobs to the state of Georgia and the State of Atlanta. It could wind up costing more than $1 billion in tax breaks and other incentives, maybe even well beyond that. With Atlanta facing other problems, is it worth it to offer that kind of money to a corporate giant?
I don't think it's worth it to offer $1 billion in incentives, but I do believe that we have to provide an opportunity to create partnership. And what that means is we're going to ask, when I'm mayor, that Amazon be a part of improving education here in our city. So we're going to ask for an investment from Amazon to do that. We're going to make sure with the 50,000 plus jobs it creates that we are making sure that the folks who are here in this city have an opportunity to fill those jobs and be prepared to do that. So I'm going to ask Amazon to make an investment in that. And also, Amazon's got to be a partner in terms of increasing affordable housing in our city. With the number of folks who will come with Amazon to Atlanta, and those who certainly are here and looking for opportunity, we've got to make sure that Amazon can be a true partner with respect to affordable housing. Lastly, Amazon's going to be looking to move in a number of different places. I'm going to ask them to move on the south side of town, a place where they can find great opportunities, bring economic development to the community, but also create jobs in that community and that part of town, which so desperately certainly needs it. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Keith Whitney, it's now your turn to ask a question of Mary Norwood.
All right. Mary, we've been covering you for 25 years. I know we go way back, but for the life of me, I don't know if you're a Republican, a Democrat, an independent. And granted, this is a nonpartisan race, but Atlanta is a Democratic stronghold. And so there are a lot of folks, obviously, who want to know. I mean, do you have a party affiliation? We know you have Republicans on your campaign. And if you're a Democrat or independent, that's like Macy's hiring Gimbals. And so how do you kind of explain that? And, you know, can you take a stand one way or the other?
I am a lifelong independent. I have never been a member of either political party. I have a very inclusive campaign. 2/3 of my campaign members are Democrats. 1/3 of my campaign are either independents or Republicans. But more importantly, what is important in our city is that I have represented this entire city for decades, and I have shown my commitment to every single person in this city. I voted for Hillary Clinton. I do not ascribe to some of the policies and views that the current administration federally has, and I will always stand up for Atlanta. I will always stand up for equality, for inclusion, and for fairness for every single person.
Thank you very much. Michelle Wright, it's now your turn to ask a question of Peter Raymond.
Mr. Raymond, I'd like to talk about housing, and affordable housing has come up a couple times, and in speaking with a lot of people, that is the issue that is in their focus. So my question is two-part. One is, what is your plan to deal with affordable housing? And two, what do you consider affordable?
And again, you have 60 seconds here.
So first, there are a number of things the City of Atlanta has to do around affordable housing. We are currently forcing out of Atlanta the very people that built Atlanta. And I find that morally unacceptable, and I find it to be practically unacceptable. So we're going to do several specific things. We're going to use all of the tools that cities and towns have at their disposal to create new affordable housing and keep existing affordable housing. So just a few examples: community land trusts, inclusionary zoning, community development corporations, site-specific negotiations with vendors. There are a series of powerful tools that, if you bring the will and the skill to this issue, I will bring that to affordable housing issue. On what is affordable, for me, it is minimum wage jobs and below, which is really 30% of area median income or below. We have to have housing for those individuals as well on up the income spectrum.
Thank you very much. And we now go back to Greg Bluestein. His question is for Rohit Amanamachi.
Mr. Amanamachi, your campaign centers on improving mass transit and reimagining Atlanta's streetcar system. Even the tax increase that raises $2.5 billion for MARTA over the next 10 years only goes so far. So how would you use that limited transportation funding to dramatically reduce congestion in Atlanta?
So I have plans to reimagine the streetcar system, right? Which would mean I'm trying to introduce the idea that we install trolley buses instead, because they'd be tremendously cheaper, and if they were connected to the traffic lights, they wouldn't get stuck in traffic either. So that's just one of the ideas that I have. But the thing with the MARTA expansion is that we really need to be smart about prioritizing which projects would improve connectivity and accessibility to transit the most, and then be able to advocate that housing gets built around transit as well, so that when we address the affordable housing issue, we address it on all fronts, such as access to the city, quality of life, cost of living, etc.
Thanks very much. Keith Whitney, it's now your turn to ask Michael Sterling a question.
Michael Sterling, you are a federal prosecutor, former federal prosecutor. What's your take on the corruption scandal, looking at it through a prosecutor's eyes? What should city officials have known in terms of what was going on there? Where do you think folks dropped the ball in order for that culture to thrive and to reach the level that it's at now, if it doesn't continue to expand?
Well, my take on it is that it's extraordinarily disturbing, Keith, that we see, this type of massive corruption, $1 million bribe scheme unfolding at City Hall. You can't lay the blame directly on political officials because you always are going to have rogue actors, but you can lay the blame on political officials for not doing more to mitigate the corruption. We don't have enough transparency in our government, which is one of the reasons why I've called for people who lobby city council and city hall to register at lobbyists, something that just simply doesn't happen now. That's why I've called for us to work proactively with the U.S. Attorney's Office to mitigate corruption in the future. But it's very disturbing that our city just hasn't done more to mitigate the corruption, that city council hasn't done more, the administration hasn't done more to mitigate this corruption going forward and taking steps to make sure that it doesn't happen again. I took over the Atlanta Workforce Development Agency, which had a culture of corruption, and it was my job to do things that make sure that corruption didn't happen in the future. And that's what I'll do when I'm mayor of Atlanta.
Thank you very much. Michelle Wright, it's now your turn to ask a question of Vincent Fort.
Senator Ford, I'd like to talk a little bit about business recruitment and what it is that you would like to see Atlanta, since you're looking to move more from state to a city. What is it that you'd like to see brought into Atlanta, and how do you propose doing that?
Well, one of the things I'd want to do is strengthen opportunities for minority businesses, for African American and women firms. I think there needs to be a special focus, like I've had at the state capitol. I've created the first disadvantaged business enterprise program for state money in the history of the state, $900 million a year, that's available on a fair basis to African American companies and women-owned companies and other minorities. It's absolutely critical that when we talk about recruiting businesses, we include in that recruitment making sure that African American businesses, women businesses, and other businesses have the same opportunity as large corporations. We should pursue Amazon with caveats, but we should also recruit, help to expand small businesses, including African American businesses and women-owned businesses.
Thank you very much. Greg Bluestein has the next question, and it goes to Kathy Woolard.
Ms. Woolard, Atlanta Mayor Kasim Reed and Governor Deal have a close working relationship, something that his predecessors did not always enjoy. What would you do if elected mayor to work with the next governor, and where would you draw the line to say what's in the state's best interest might not be in the city's best interest?
Well, thanks for that question. I've been working down at our state capitol for the last 15 or 20 years, lobbying members of the General Assembly and the governor on social issues on behalf of nonprofit organizations. I've developed great relationships on both sides of the aisle. In fact, for the last 4 years, I've been the lead lobbyist trying to defeat those religious exemption laws. So I've been able to hold true to our principles while working with the governor and other members of the Republican leadership to make sure that we don't pass something that affects negatively citizens who live in our state and who live in our city. I also helped pass the only comprehensive civil rights bill in the state of Georgia. So Atlanta already has a statement of our values about not permitting discrimination on the basis of housing, employment, and public accommodations, which has really held us in good stead as these debates have developed. So behind the scenes, we have to develop relationships, but we also have to be candid about what we stand for and hold true to those values.
Thank you. Keith Whitney has the next question, and it goes to Kwanzaa Hall.
Kwanzaa, obviously the reclassification bill with marijuana, that is a big issue here in this city. You talk a lot about that. You and Vincent Ford as well have talked about that in this campaign in terms of the way that it has, the previous way the law was exercised has hurt so many lives. Can you get into what this new reclassification will do in terms of helping people, but also talk about the fact that it's still not legal to smoke pot in this city?
That's right. Pot, weed, marijuana, MJ, Mary Jane is not legal in our city, nor is it in the state. But the legislation that I created and I passed 2 Mondays ago makes possession of less than an ounce of marijuana a non-jailable offense if there's no other crime. And that means it now becomes a ticket with a fine of up to $75. There are families who've lost everything. There are children who lost their scholarships. There are people who've lost their jobs. They've become unemployable as a result of this. And the disparity is heavily a racial disparity. Primarily African-American men. Of the 1,000 arrests, 92% are African-American men in our jail for possession of marijuana. For us to focus our energy not on the petty crimes, but on the serious crimes, the violent crimes, it really is a benefit to our citizens, and it's going to help to save taxpayers millions of dollars.
Thanks very much. The next question comes from Michelle Wright, and it goes to John Eaves.
Chairman Eaves, I'd like to talk a little bit about safety, and I'd like to ask you about the police department and what your plans are to kind of help recruit more police officers, if there are plans for raises, or what your plans are to help bolster those ranks.
So I have a completely different perspective than anybody else up here. We spend $500 million every year on law enforcement, criminal justice, and detention. I believe that we need to reshape that model and put an emphasis in terms of consolidating the court system, getting rid of one of the 2 jails that exist in Atlanta, and that's the Atlanta Detention Center, and the savings will be $35 million, reinvesting those dollars into youth in terms of after-school programs, in terms of work readiness programs, in terms of arts education programs, in terms of early childhood education programs. So I believe that there's a preventive model that relates to public safety. In terms of police, I think that they're woefully underpaid. The city of Atlanta, we need to have a pay classification study, which I did as chairman of Fulton County, to get pay up to a certain level. So I'm committed to having good pay, but more importantly, training and focus on retention. But I do believe that public safety is impacted by reinvesting dollars in the front end to prevent crime on the front end.
Thanks so much. Next up, Greg Bluestein has a question for Glenn Wrightson.
Yeah, Mr. Wrightson, your campaign filing shows that you've loaned yourself a significant amount of money to run this race. Not every political candidate like yourself has that kind of resources. What would you do to reduce the barriers of entry to be competitive in a race like this one?
Reduce the barriers of entry. I think that's set by the state. The state establishes what the fee is to file to run for mayor. And I want to take this opportunity to say that the distinction between the Wrightson campaign and the other individuals here is that the Wrights, as mayor, I would focus on the core services that the city provides. We're hearing about all the programs, and we've got these programs that we can have, and we can have this program. And the concept that if we take care of the luxuries, the necessities will take care of themselves, that's not true. We've got to get back to the core services the city provides, clean up the trash in this city, the businesses will come, we will have less crime, we'll have a better city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wrightson. And finally, in this round, Keith Whitney will ask a question of Keisha Lance Bottoms.
Ms. Bottoms, yesterday I have to admit I was lost in the tumult surrounding the marijuana tweets, and so I missed your press conference on the billion-dollar initiative that you have in terms of affordable housing. Anytime I hear an initiative that starts with a B as in billion, I'd like to hear more details about what exactly this is going to do and how would you pull it off.
Affordability is one of the major issues that we have addressed during this campaign season, and it really is top of mind for people of all races and all economic levels in this city. This billion-dollar initiative will be $500 million of public investment. That's a collaboration between City of Atlanta, Atlanta Housing Authority, Invest Atlanta, the Atlanta Beltline, the Recreation Authority, and other interested partners. And then $500 million of investment from our private and our philanthropic community. We've seen it done before. We've seen it done when our partners came together to help fund Grady. We've seen it with the building of the National Center for Civil and Human Rights. We've seen the city come together in very much an Atlanta way to address pressing issues, and affordability is the most pressing issue today.
Thanks very much. And that concludes the first round of the Atlanta Press Club debate among the candidates running for mayor of Atlanta here on Public Broadcasting Atlanta. It is great to have you along with us. We'll now go to our second round, and in this round, each candidate will have a chance to ask a question to the opponent of his or her choice, just one. Each candidate will have 30 seconds to ask the question. Then your opponent's going to have 60 seconds to respond, and then the candidate answering the question will have 30 seconds to rebut. And by random selection, Vincent Fort, you may ask the first question to an opponent of your choice.
I'd like to ask a question of Ms. Bottoms. Even though you earned more money than any local official in the state and bought a Martha Vineyard second home, you did not pay your water bill. Atlantans pay the highest water bills in the country. When a high-rise million-dollar condo didn't pay their bill, and recently there was a group of apartment residents in Southwest Atlanta who had their water cut off by the city, you said nothing. Why should Atlantans trust you to stand up for them? Regular Atlantans, why should they expect you to stand up for them?
Thank you for that question. I have worked since I was 10 years old, and since I was 15, I have worked 2 jobs at any given time. As it relates to my water bill, I paid a standard amount each month, $150 to $200 a month. And I say to anyone, if your bill spikes to $800, then you probably shouldn't pay it either until you get an explanation. As I sit here today, I have a $1,700 credit with the Atlanta Water Department. So I suggest that we work as a city to help address the issues that are causing our water bills to spike. But like so many other people in this city, I budget a certain amount each month for my bills. That includes my mortgages, and I'm very proud that my husband and I have been able to buy 2 additional investment properties, and we hope to buy 1 more so that we can leave a property to each of our children. And so I think that it's about budgeting, and I think the city has to do a better job with our water bills, and we have to make sure that we don't have spikes like the one that I experienced.
Senator Fort, you have 30 seconds if you want it.
You know, I've said that City Hall has lost its way, and watching out for billionaires and millionaires as opposed to watching out for regular people. Ms. Bottoms' response is proof positive of that. Blame City Hall, blame other folk. We need somebody at City Hall that's going to watch out for regular people and not the 1%.
John Eves, it's now your turn to ask a question of an opponent of your choice.
Sure. This election is about integrity. Keith, thank you for the question to Keisha Lance Bottoms. That idea that she shared yesterday was plagiarized from me. So I want the voters to know that there's a degree of plagiarism that's going on in terms of good ideas. But I want to follow up to what Vincent Fort asked of Keisha. There are 2 types of people in this race. There are those who use a position to help others, and then those who use a position to help themselves. Keisha Lance Bottoms has had a job as executive director of the Recreation Authority. She was given that job, had 2 paychecks City Council and Recreation Authority $190,000 unpaid water bill. How can she be a person of integrity as potential mayor of Atlanta?
Ms. Bottoms?
Well, unlike you, Mr. Eves, I've actually never faced an ethics investigation. I didn't face one for using a city-owned car like you did at the county. I've never had an ethics investigation at the city or state level. And in fact, so that I could be sure that I was in complete compliance, I received an opinion from our city ethics officer before I accepted the job at the Recreation Authority. I'm very proud to have led the transformation of Turner Field, $250 million reinvestment into a community that has been underserved for any number of years. And so I am very proud of the work that I have done. I will continue to work tirelessly to make sure that our community is impacted in a positive way, and I'm glad that I was able to do it at Turner Field.
Mr. Eves, you have 30 seconds.
First of all, I've never had any ethics allegations, any ethics violations, and she was given a job. She was given a job. She collected 2 paychecks that were publicly funded, and no one in their good conscience could take a double paycheck, a full-time job as executive director of the Recreation Authority, and a part-time job as city council person, collectively over $180,000. That is just inexcusable.
Thanks to you both. Glenn Wrightson, it is your turn to ask a question of the opponent of your choice. Just one.
Thank you. I would like to ask Peter Amon a question, and I've gotten a brochure in the mail from your campaign that says you're the one that's qualified to oversee the finances, and I have a business degree from Wake Forest University and spent my career consulting with municipal systems. I've got a question I've wondered all along. How is it that sometimes the city, and you were the finance director there, can say, well, we don't have the $50 million for this project, and then the next week they say, oh, we found the $50 million in this reserve account?
So I'm not sure which specific instance you're referring to. First of all, just for clarity, I was the chief operating officer of the city for 2 years in 2010 and 2011. And when I was at City Hall, we only had $7 million in our reserve account, and the other reserve accounts were actually negative, which is only something that you can have in city government, I guess. So what we did was we put in place strong weekly and monthly tracking of expenses. We made sure we knew where the dollars were going. We make sure that we could hold the departments accountable for their expenditures. And through that process, we've now built up to a reserve of over $175 million. We put in place tight fiscal controls, which have allowed the city to have 7 consecutive bond rating increases. So there has, in fact, been strong fiscal management, certainly in 2010 and 11, and certainly if you'd like to look at the CAFR, which is the audited financial statements of the city back then, you'll see that there was little funds.
Mr. Wrightson, you've got 30 seconds if you want. And maybe it wasn't during your tenure, but how is it that the city can one day say we don't have the $40 million for this project, and then 2 days later, oh, we found the $40 million in a reserve account?
Thanks. Thanks, Mr. Wrightson. Michael Sterling, you now have a chance to ask a question of one of your opponents.
Yes, my question is for Councilwoman Norwood. Councilwoman Norwood, you've served 3 terms on City Council. My question is very simple. Have you and your colleagues on City Council done the very best you can do?
Yes. I have voted over the course of my 3 terms and voted my conscience every single time, and my record stands compared to anyone, anywhere. What is true is we have a strong mayoral form of government, and when the mayor controls all city contracts, all employees, and all city services, there are things that you cannot get the right vote. You cannot get enough people on the city council to vote in the way that I may have wanted to see that vote come out.
Mr. Sterling, you've got 30 seconds if you want.
Yeah, I just want to talk to the people of Atlanta. If our city council has done the best we can do and we still have the worst income inequality in the country, the worst economic mobility, we're losing affordable housing every day, we've got the worst education, one of the worst education equity problems in the city, we've got some of the worst traffic in the city, they don't deserve a promotion. And so I've said all along that my campaign isn't a campaign against these people sitting on the stage, but is a campaign against the status quo. And so I would submit to you, Atlanta, that if city council has done the very best they can do. They don't deserve a promotion to the mayor's office.
Thank you. Kwanzaa Hall has a chance now to ask a question of one of your opponents, and you have 30 seconds.
Thank you, Dennis. It's always a great question to have. Mr. Rice.
Yes, sir.
When I'm in the runoff, and if you're not, will you endorse me?
I think I well might. I think I well might. There's the answer.
Thank you.
Any need to rebut that one, Councilman
Thank
Hall?
you. I'll be everybody's mayor.
Rohit Amanamanchi, your question now for one of your opponents.
Thanks. I have a question I wish I could ask to many of my opponents, but Michael Sterling did a good job of that. So I would like to direct my question to Senator Fort. The question is, given that your Senate district contains some of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Atlanta, such as Midtown and Buckhead, as well as some of the poorest neighborhoods in Atlanta, such as Vine City and Campbellton Road, what would you do differently as mayor to address the income inequality in Atlanta that you could not do or did not do as a state senator for the last 21 years?
Thank you. You're right. Atlanta's #1 in income inequality and income immobility. A child born at Grady Hospital this afternoon has less chance in any place in this country of moving into the middle class. That's not the Atlanta I want, and I don't think it's the Atlanta anyone wants. What I would do is continue and expand on the things that I have worked on. We would stabilize neighborhoods. In particular, City Hall used to have a program to help senior citizens, fixed income senior citizens, renovate their homes. What I would do is reinstitute that program, and I know there's going to be some naysayers who are going to say, where are we going to get the money? Well, if we can give 2 sports teams $850 million, we can renovate the homes of our fixed income senior citizens. So in order to stabilize our neighborhoods, we need to be able to allow senior citizens to age in place. I will be promoting 2-year tuition-free college for any child who graduates from a school in Atlanta.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Amanamanchi, you've got 30 seconds to rebut if you want.
Sure. The reason why I'm in this race is that it seems to me that the situations that we're in, it's kind of a crisis situation, and any number of the people who are here that have been in a position of power to do something about it have not done enough. If we're facing these crisis situations, the income inequality, the traffic, the housing shortage, 70% of low-income workers can't afford a place to live, what has been done about it or not done about it that has led us to the situation, and why would you choose someone who has continued that record?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Amanamanchi. Mary Norwood, your turn to ask a question of one opponent of your choice.
Yes, and I want to ask the same question that I asked the other night because I think it's very important. I asked Cesar Mitchell to let us know about his plan for public safety and particularly our new recruits. His father was a police officer, and his answer was very important and insightful the other night, and I would like for him to repeat it.
Well, thank you, Ms. Norwood. I appreciate that question. I'm the son of an Atlanta police officer who walked a footbeat. So for me as mayor, I'm going to make sure that we have police officers walking in the community, providing true community policing every day and every way. We're going to make sure our police officers are well trained and well paid, and that they have all the resources they need so that they can be on the street, on the ground, helping our young people, helping our senior citizens, and everyone in between. I believe that when police officers are on the footbeat, when police officers are working with firefighters and being deployed into the community from police stations and from fire stations as well, I believe our communities are going to be much safer. But I'm also going to make sure that our police officers are really connected with technology and have the support of cameras throughout our city. We're going to increase our cameras to 30,000 to 40,000 in the city of Atlanta. As a son of an Atlanta police officer, I believe the best thing we can do to make our city the strongest city it can be is to reduce crime. So we're going to make sure also that our police officers and firefighters are mentors to young people so that they stay on the right track.
Ms. Norwood, you have 30 seconds if you'd like to take it.
Well, and I wanted community to hear this because I think it's very, very helpful. Mr. Mitchell and I worked on the raises for the police officers. He put together the technical advisory group, and then we introduced the legislation. I introduced the legislation to get the officers and the firefighters the raises they deserved. So I wanted the public to understand it's a very multifaceted issue with a lot of moving parts, but we are both committed very much to public safety.
Thank you. Kathy Woolard, your turn to question one of your opponents.
Thank you. Councilmember Bottoms, I want to continue the questioning about your service on the Fulton County County Recreation Authority, excuse me. The Georgia Court of Appeals ruled in Hewley v. City of Thomaston that a council member is ineligible to serve on a city-county rec authority. Nina Hickson, the city attorney at the time, said that it was a gray matter. You've been a lawyer and a judge. Did you ask her if it was illegal? Or if not, why didn't you? And why didn't you recuse yourself if you found out the answer?
Thank you for the question. What I asked Ms. Hickson when she was chair of the ethics department was, would it be appropriate for me to serve in a dual capacity? At the time that I went to the Recreation Authority, I was also practicing law full-time. Council members are considered part-time, and we often have additional employment. The ethics opinion that I received in writing said that it was indeed appropriate for me to serve in both capacities, and also that there was nothing illegal. There was an opinion that was also sought from the state level, and the state said that there was nothing illegal. The parameters that I received was that I needed to be careful to recuse myself from all votes related to the Recreation Authority, which I did each and every time. And in fact, I continued to recuse myself for votes after I left my employment with the Recreation Authority. And just recently, the city attorney's office advised me that it would be appropriate for me to vote on matters, but there haven't been many that have come up since my tenure has ended.
Thank you. Ms. Willard, you've got 30 seconds if you want.
In the newspaper at the time, Nina Hickson said that it was a gray issue, and if someone challenged it, she might take another look. I took another look and saw that the law was really clear in that case that I just cited. Listen, being ethical and making decisions and leading is about doing the right thing regardless of what the law says. If I had been faced with that dilemma, I would not have accepted that position, and I would have just continued my service as a council member.
Thank you very much. Our next question comes from Peter Amon.
I have a question for Ms. Norwood. Last night in our debate at Georgia Tech, you mentioned that the City Council has nothing to do with the approval of contracts, and I can read you the specific quote if you like. You were first elected to City Council in 2001, and certainly since that time, the city law has been very clear that in fact all contracts, all proposals go to City Council for review, for vetting. You have hearings and discussions, you can have work sessions, and then are voted on. And in fact, City Council has to affirmatively vote to pass a contract and an agreement with the vendor. So which is it? Were you just trying to avoid responsibility for what has gone on, or did you not realize that Council was supposed to actually have that approval role?
Mr. Amon, what I was referring to is that we don't know all of the bids and we don't see all of the responses to the proposals. You have said for several months now that you have had no involvement in procurement. That actually is not correct. When you were hired by Mayor Reed, one of your responsibilities from the press release was to oversee procurement. More importantly, when there was a challenge to the procurement process in 2011, on the first page of the lawsuit says, and so you say that you had nothing to do with procurement. Adam Smith met with Mayor Reed, Lewis Miller, Peter Amon, Kathy Hampton, and others to discuss the cancellation of the first round of RFPs before he allegedly made the cancellation decision. I would appreciate your explaining how you were involved in the SSP refusal and challenge, but you had nothing to do with procurement as the Chief Operating Officer.
So to be very clear, what I have always said is that I'm not in the vendor selection process, which is the process of the meetings and the process of scoring candidates. For the meeting you're referring to, the person by law, by code, that had the power to make that decision was Adam Smith. Before that meeting, I asked Adam Smith to make his decision, to put it in writing. It was delivered to my office in writing in a sealed envelope. It was then opened and scanned, sent electronically to Lewis Miller and others, including, I believe, the city attorney. And that was on record before that meeting took place, very intentionally, because Adam Smith had the power in that case, not I and not anybody else in that room.
There's
Thank
more.
you.
There's
Ms.
more here, but
Norwood,
we'll continue.
You've already had one question for a candidate, and you'll have time as we move through the round to pick up on that as we go through the rest of the debate. But thank you. Keisha Lance Bottoms, you may now ask a question of one of your opponents.
Thank you. Mr. Eves, I've never seen a plan that you've had about anything, much less affordability. In fact, under your watch at Fulton County, 10,000 units were built with taxpayer money, and barely 5% were deemed affordable. Is that your idea of affordability going forward with the city?
I'm proud about my record as chairman of Fulton County. I've done a lot of great things to help people out, ranging from saving Grady Hospital to doing criminal justice reform to bringing about economic development. In fact, in Southwest Atlanta, where you take credit for the development in Southwest Atlanta, it's really Fulton County and what I've done under my watch. I'm absolutely committed to housing affordability in terms of coming up with ways that we can use a tax plan. I did the tax freeze back in June. Very proud about that. It saved millions of dollars for property owners. It saved senior citizens the tough choice of making the decision between paying for their medicine or paying for their taxes. I'm very proud about that. I asked the Fulton County Commission to do it a second year. And as mayor, I'm committed to working with the legislature to make sure that we have more tax relief for our citizens so that they can stay in their homes.
Ms. Bottoms, you have 30 seconds to rebut if you want.
Thank you. The tax issue was an issue that you addressed that happened under your watch. It's not just about what we say we will do, but what have we done? That's why I'm very proud about the creation of displacement-free zones that I called upon the city of Atlanta to create to address the issue of affordability and people being displaced from their communities. That is the kind of action I will take if elected mayor. It won't just be about fixing problems that I created. It will be about working towards real solutions.
Thank you. And finally, Cesar Mitchell, you get to ask a question of the opponent of your choice.
Thank you. I got to ask this of any council member, but I'll ask this question of Ms. Bottoms. As you know, I've called on a moratorium for all contracts that are non-emergency, that don't expire till this time next year, particularly airport retail contracts. But the administration has decided to move forward and ask this council to pass them this year. Entirely too early and certainly not in good keeping with respect to the federal investigation. One particular contractor, the Pratt Group, actually has applied for 4 of the 10 retail contracts. This contractor gave you $30,000 at least for your campaign, and this contractor is also identified as the contractor who bribed the procurement director. When these contracts come before the council before the end of the year, as they should not, are you going to vote on them?
Thank you for the question. It was actually $27,500, and I know the amount because it has been returned already. But I am interested in knowing who's donated to your PAC, because we don't know what, if any, contractors donated to your PAC because you haven't disclosed that information. I don't speculate on votes that are not before me, but I will certainly, in consultation with the city attorney's office, as I always do, on the front end of any issues that may need clarity for me, I will ask if it is appropriate for me to place a vote on that respective legislation, and we will see what the city attorney advises.
I don't think that's a legal issue. It's a policy issue, whether or not it's appropriate to vote on contracts that don't expire till this time next year. It's highly inappropriate in this moment in time where we have a federal investigation. And for a contractor, whether he or she gave you $27,000 or $30,000, the fact still remains it's inappropriate to vote on these contracts at this time. And I'm just asking whether or not you are going to vote on them as a policy matter, as a representative of the citizens of Atlanta.
15 seconds, Ms. Bottoms.
I think that to ask whether or not I'm going to vote on something that's not before me is actually just all speculation. But the question then becomes, will anyone who's sitting in elected office vote on any matter for any person who's donated to our campaign? So I'm not quite sure where you expect us to draw the line on that. And as far as I know, that line has, it's never been asked, so I'll make that determination when the vote comes up.
All right, thank you. That concludes our second round, and if you are just joining us, first of all, welcome. This is the debate among the candidates for mayor of Atlanta, all 11 of them originating from the studios of Public Broadcasting Atlanta. And now we go to our third and final round. And yes, our panelists are still here after that round of questioning among the candidates. Greg Bluestein of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Michelle Wright of WSB Radio, and Keith Whitney of CBS 46 Atlanta. Now, each of our panelists will ask a question to the candidate of his or her choice until we just flat run out of time, and I will determine whether a rebuttal is appropriate. Greg Bluestein, you get the first question in this round.
Yeah, Councilwoman Norwood, the next mayor will be poised to wrestle with White House policies on issues like immigration, transportation, healthcare, the economy, a range of issues. What do you make of President Donald Trump's first year in office, and how would you decide whether to support or oppose a Trump initiative?
The first year in office has been disappointing to many citizens in this country. The policies that have come out of this administration have not been policies, for the most part, that I have agreed with at all. But I will say this, I will work closely to get the right policies for Atlanta. My record is very clear. I have been elected for 3 terms. I have served this city for 25 years. And so everyone knows that I am progressive. Everyone knows that I am for equality. Everyone knows that I am for inclusion. That is the way that I will run this city. And so I will always go to bat for Atlanta being the city that is always, always fair, always inclusive, always embracing of every person that I will be representing.
Thank you. Keith Whitney, it's your turn to ask a question of whichever candidate you choose.
Man, I could ask this of anybody, and so really I'm just kind of flipping a coin invisibly. But, you know, you go out and you're in the traffic and you see all the development in this town. And the fact of the matter is, I guess I'm going to pose it to Kathy Woolard, but the fact of the matter is, would you be courageous enough to say enough is enough when it comes to development in some of our in-town neighborhoods that are congested, gridlocked, priced out, that young people that I talk to on a daily basis tell me they can't even afford to live there. When you can, it's a 30-minute drive to go 3 miles. Is enough enough?
Well, I think enough is enough. And one of the things that I've got concerned about is for the better part of the last 8 years, we've really not had a very strong planning department. I'm relieved that Tim Keene is here, who's beginning to think about how we rezone the city, how we triple in size over the next 25 years, and how we make sure everybody is included. What I'm interested in doing is expanding our transit system by adding 5 transit lines around the city that connect into MARTA, so that people can start figuring out if they can live on a transit line that can get them to work and to the things that they need to do in their daily life. We have to make sure we're growing the city and we're growing communities in a way that is sustainable. And we also need to make sure that transportation impact fees get spent where the transportation impact happens. There's a lot we can do to instill better growth. Cities all over the country have very, very strict requirements on what grows and how you make a city work. We just haven't done it, and we can do it when I'm mayor.
Thank you, Ms. Willard. Michelle Wright, your question to whichever candidate you like.
Councilman Hall, I've got a quick question for you. In light of Atlanta's prominent role, we'll say, in the Civil War, there's a lot going on about what to do with name changes of streets and statues and everything. What is it that you would propose as mayor?
Well, we've already begun a commission from the council, and it's underway. We've populated it, so we're going in the right direction. I do believe in removing any vestiges of the past, racism or discrimination or hatred that are still symbolic and ever present in our city and in our state. In my district, we have removed one already. Mayor Maynard Jackson removed or changed the name of Forest Avenue, which was named for a KKK Grand Dragon. So this isn't something that's new. If there is a place for some of these items to be held in historical significance, just so that people understand what it is, you put it in a museum. But beyond that, hatred has no place in our society, for sure not in our city, and especially in the city that raised Dr. King. My father was the youngest member of his staff from 1963 to 1968, and I know he would be turning over in his grave right now if I don't do everything I can to make sure that we remove all of these evil images and statues as well as street names.
Thank you. Greg Bluestein, you're up next.
Mr. Amon, you often remind voters that you're the non-politician in this race, but political experience helps in dealing with complicated debates in City Hall and complicated personalities in City Council. How are you prepared to plunge into these delicate situations with no elected background?
Are you suggesting there are complicated personalities on City Council? Is that okay? Just wanted to be clear. So I've been helping the City of Atlanta in a variety of ways since 2001. I cold called Mayor Shirley Franklin at the time and offered free consulting. We ultimately did free consulting for many years for the city. During the first several months of that, I sat actually up on the dais with City Council, behind City Council members, helping them as well as the administration work their way through the budget. So my time working with City Council members goes back almost 16 years. As Chief Operating Officer, a lot of what I did was work with City Council. When we had big, important initiatives like pension reform, which was critical to the financial stability of the city, I was the guy that went and talked to City Council members individually. I was the guy who went to the Finance Exec Committee on camera and had discussions with people. So I was often in front of City Council, both publicly and privately, helping things that were important get done.
Thank you, Mr. Amon. Keith Whitney has the next question.
Again, I have no idea who to ask this to, but I'll just choose Cesar as president of the City Council. You know, I drive by the shelter at Peachtree Pine a lot, and I used to back when it was in full operation, and the change, the transformation has been unbelievable, and it took place like that, overnight. Everybody who had been loitering, the homeless, they were gone, overnight. If that can happen after the battle that it took to take that shelter out of the hands of the task force, why could that not have happened all along like that?
Well, first of all, I believe we've got to focus on addressing homelessness in our city in a profound way. We've got to make sure we're making investments and creating partnerships and getting focused on the issues that make our citizens and our residents homeless. First of all, we've got to look at what's called housing first, which means that you don't have to jump through hoops before you can actually get a roof over your head, a nice square meal, and the ability to bathe yourself. We've got to make sure you get that first, and then we address the issues that may have made you homeless. I think that's an important thing we must do. Also, as mayor, I'm going to get focused on eliminating homelessness amongst children. My wife teaches in the Atlanta public school system, and she tells me all the time how many students who are homeless in her classroom. I'm going to make sure as mayor that we eliminate homelessness amongst children, and when we do that, I believe we'll eliminate homelessness amongst families, and in doing that, I believe we'll reduce generational homelessness that plagues our city. But we've got to do it through partnership, real investment, and making sure that we're addressing other groups in the way that they need specific help based upon the issues that they're facing.
Thank you. Michelle Wright has the next question.
I want to direct this to Mr. Manamachi. What do you propose to do to keep people safe in light of a lot of the outdoor violence that we've seen, most recently in Vegas? You know, we've got tons of events that bring hundreds of thousands of people into Atlanta. What's your plan to keep people safe?
So the current strategy for police, I think, needs to have a few more tools in the toolbox. While I really agree with the strategy for the pre-arrest diversion program, which would help put people in social care instead of in jail, specifically for the incident with Vegas, I think there is another strategy which is pretty new, and it's called crime prevention through environmental design, and that's to redesign the built environment so it naturally tends to be more safe and dissuades criminal activity, like more open environments, less fences, more trees. Those kinds of things would prevent people from loitering, and with that, what is called natural surveillance, where people are around, it's a lot harder to commit a crime when it seems that the environment is more being watched by the people who are there.
Thanks very much. We're back to Greg Bluestein.
Councilwoman Bottoms, you've seen some of the other candidates up here say it, so I'm wondering what you feel. Do you believe there's a pervasive culture of corruption in City Hall?
I've been an attorney for over 20 years, part of that time as a criminal defense attorney and also as a judge and also as a prosecutor. What I know is that you can't legislate your way out of bad behavior. But what I would say is that out of 8,000 employees, we had a bad apple. And I believe that it is about trusting the process and not trusting people. That is why I'm calling on for the procurement department to go through a complete audit and to also have additional safeguards in place, like the filing of tax returns along with our financial disclosures, and also moving to an electronic system. A paper-based system opens us up to all sorts of improprieties, and so I think that going towards an electronic system creates an additional layer of insight and transparency.
Thank you. Keith Whitney, it's back to you.
This is one for Peter Amon. You know, we have a beautiful new stadium, a lot of development going around immediately in that area. Same thing happened in the Dome when that was built as well. But there still seems to be many areas that are almost penicillin resistant to trying to get some development in there. Have you ever been to the Bluff?
Yes.
Before you continue there, what would you do to turn that community around and get them in on what's happening in terms of the revitalization of the surrounding areas?
Well, let me start by telling you what I've already done, which is shortly after I left City Hall at the end of 2011, I started working with members of the Blank Foundation, and then ultimately I was a founding member of the West Side Future Fund, which is completely and solely dedicated to the Bluff, to English Avenue and Vine City and the neighborhoods in that area. And we're doing a series of things. First, in our very first board meeting, I pushed for the establishment of a fund that would pay for the increasing property taxes of those who live there so they wouldn't be forced out. So that's the first thing, is to protect the people that have stayed with Atlanta and stayed in that neighborhood. The second thing we did was we started to put together programs to fund the acquisition of blighted properties and turn them into permanent affordable housing. So using nonprofits like community land trusts that buy the housing and don't force gentrification, but actually have the whole housing at a discount. So I've done a series of things to help these neighborhoods, but we have a job desert there. That's why I have a program as mayor that I'll institute called 10X, which is to increase by 10 times the workforce training and development for placing people into jobs.
Thanks a lot. Michelle Wright has the next question.
This question I want to direct to Senator Fort. And Senator Fort, this question came up a little earlier in our forum, and I want to talk about really the cooperation between the state and the city and what that looks like. As was mentioned earlier, Governor Deal and Mayor Reed have a very good working relationship. How do you see that continuing if you're elected? Do you see that continuing, and what is it that you would do to make sure that the city benefits as opposed to, say, the state?
Great question. I appreciate that. What I would do is make sure that we talk, negotiate, and make deals that are good for the city of Atlanta. For example, during the Republican regime under Governor Perdue and Governor Deal, I've gotten $45 to $50 million for two-year schools in Atlanta, Atlanta Technical College and Atlanta Metropolitan College. Mind you, these are under Republican regimes, more money than any legislator from Atlanta has ever gotten for those two schools. If you walk on those campuses, any new building you go to, except maybe for one, is money that I received in the budget during Republicans being in place. The $900 million a year bill that passed in the DBE program that was created, I sat in Governor Deal's office and spoke to him about making sure that a disadvantaged business enterprise program was established. I've had no problems at the state capitol making deals that benefit the city of Atlanta. I'll continue that as mayor. It has to happen, whether it's a Republican regime or Democrat regime. I'm going to do it.
Thank you, Senator Fort. Greg Bluestein begins another round of questions.
Commissioner Eves, would you declare Atlanta a sanctuary city and potentially risk federal funding for defying the White House's crackdown on undocumented immigrants?
Well, I'll say that I was proud as chairman of Fulton County to have been invited by the Obama administration last December, just before he transitioned out of office, and been a part of a small conversation of county execs and mayors to talk about this whole concept. You can embrace a sanctuary city concept without calling it a sanctuary city. Basically, being a sanctuary city is making it a safe zone for people to feel safe who are part of the immigrant community. People don't realize this, but my grandfather immigrated to the United States from Jamaica, so I have a sensitivity towards people who are from the immigrant community. So you can make it a safe zone. You can say to the police that there is to be no racial profiling in terms of people who look a certain way. So you have a non-tolerance posture in terms of that. And then secondly, you just reach out to members of the immigrant community, as I've done as chairman of Fulton County. So I think you can embrace the sanctuary city concept without calling it a sanctuary city.
Thank you. Keith Whitney has the next question.
For Kwanzaa Hall in the 2nd District, you are well loved there. There's been a lot of development. The city bird, the crane, is up everywhere. How would you move that development momentum south side, westward?
Very, very easily. So I have over $2.2 billion of investment in development in Midtown alone, and I've been very close and worked very integrally with the development community and neighborhoods to make sure we have a healthy balance. When I look to the west and the southeast and the southwest, we have a massive opportunity to create thousands of units. I'm looking at the 11 former Atlanta Housing Authority properties, 400 acres immediately on those sites, another 500 acres around there. We can create about 35,000 units, bare minimum 50 units per acre going to the west at a range of price points, starting at $400 or $500, going up to $700, $800, $900, $1,000 a month. And they can be mixed income, modeled after the Eastlake projects as well as Centennial Place in my district. We've done this before in our city. We just need to use the tools that we have in Invest Atlanta, as well as bring forth some of the money that's also offshore that has not been repatriated, that wants to invest in our city. And we can make sure that all of our citizens have a healthy place to live. Dollar houses, senior home repair as well.
Thank you. Michelle Wright has the next question.
Michael Sterling, I'd love to hear your thoughts on infrastructure and transportation in your plan with that. We've talked a little bit about that, of the immense amount of building that's going on in the city. That's great. However, many city residents are very frustrated with trying to actually drive through the city and people trying to come into the city, all of that. What are your plans to ease some of that congestion or not make it so frustrating for people?
Sure, thank you for that question. I think this is one of the biggest issues where we've seen really failure on behalf of City Council, where we haven't had our transportation and infrastructure addressed in a meaningful way. I've had the opportunity to work with 32 advisors and Michael Likoski, who's one of the country's leading infrastructure experts. We've got a number of great infrastructure plans that are in the city that will help mitigate traffic, from MARTA, from the Atlanta Bicycle Coalition, from the Atlanta Regional Commission. One of the biggest issues we face is funding. And so I've put a proposal on the table that we would have an infrastructure bank that, with a one-time capital infusion and managed properly, could create the type of revenue we need to fund some of these critical projects. I've also called for a review of all of the critical choke points in our city where we can ease Midtown traffic. I think we've got to increase the investment in MARTA by getting our state and federal partners to invest. We're one of the only transit systems that don't get state funding. We've got to get people out of their vehicles and convince them to take MARTA and public transportation. And I think that'll help ease some of the traffic, and I think we can address our $750 million backlog.
Thank you, Mr. Sterling. Back to Greg Bluestein.
Councilman Norwood, it's no secret you and Mayor Reed have been at odds for a while now. If elected mayor, what part of his legacy would you do your best to preserve, and what part of his legacy would you want to erase?
I would say that the part I want to preserve is the Atlanta City Design Plan. I am a big proponent of the fact that Commissioner Keene has understood that our neighborhoods should be preserved, because I have been about preserving neighborhoods for 25 years. I know how important they are to our city, and I've been protecting communities and preserving neighborhoods. What I would change is procurement. I would not be sending back RFPs when 54% of them were turned in correctly, and 46% were not.
And just
That
to
was-
clarify for folks who don't understand the abbreviation, request for proposal, that's an RFP, right?
Yes, that I am talking about the SSP proposal that I referenced earlier today about Mr. Amon. That was part of a major solicitation at the airport. 54% of those proposals, those responses were legitimate and were completed accurately. 46% were not. They were sent back. I would not do that as mayor.
Next question comes from Keith Whitney.
Let me ask John Eves a question about bicycles in the city. You know, I love riding a bike. I'm a big proponent. The problem is you got 1 million people coming to work here every day who are not on bikes and probably not taking any form of mass transit. How do you collate that bike system so that guys like me can get to work and not feel like I'm going to get killed when it transitions from a bike lane to that vague bike lane that's kind of a bike lane except there's a truck behind me?
So there's a dual approach, Keith. Number one, I think it's a change of attitude. Last summer I was in Berlin and I saw the future of Atlanta, where I saw thousands and thousands of cyclists going to work or going to play, coexisting with those on the road structure. So I think what has happened in Berlin is you educate folks. You have a certification process in terms of those who use bikes. They are taught and they're certified, so you have a certain cycling etiquette. But it also has a certain protocol and an effect on those who are motorists. So I'm committed to not only having support for the cyclists and having a parallel lane, a complete street concept that Fulton County has adopted under my watch, but I also think that the road structure, infrastructure that we have in the city must connect with the cities and the counties and the suburban area. We can't do it all in the city of Atlanta and not have an integrated, connected network that will allow cars and cyclists to go in and out of our city.
Next question is from Michelle Wright.
I'd like to direct this to Mr. Wrightson. Mr. Wrightson, tell me a little bit about your thoughts about bringing more technology to the city. Do you have a plan to that? And if so, what does that look like?
The commerce and economic engine now is backed by technology, it does seem. And of course, that relies on electricity. I wouldn't say that I have a specific plan to bring technology here. I know that with the Olympics, we had a boost with the infrastructure. I do see much construction with Google installing underground fiber. I think that the city government would need to do all it could to be ahead of, or at least in parallel or ahead of the curve on how to provide services and use technology. I've been an advocate of having a system where information, data is recorded. Say I've run out of time. A pothole, a leaky water meter would go into a database at City Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Wrightson. Greg Bluestein has the next question.
Yeah, Senator Fort, you've got some pricey sounding policy initiatives on higher education, on expansion of MARTA, on arts. How are you going to pay for it?
Well, the expansion of MARTA is, the referendum passed last November, so that money is in the pipeline. What I would not do is allow Emory to annex into the city, jump in line over projects in Southwest Atlanta. Arts, I would consider that 0.1 cent sales tax that is being discussed if it was fairly distributed among artists in all sectors of the city. And then as far as the 2-year tuition-free college, San Francisco does it, Boston is doing it, Kalamazoo, Michigan is doing it. We're going to do it in Atlanta because we need to invest in our children. Earlier I said that a child born in Atlanta, poor, has least chance of any place in this country of moving up to the middle class. We have to ask not only how we can pay for it, we will, but we also have to ask what will happen if we don't pay for it, if we don't invest in our children.
Thank you, Senator. Got time for one more question, and it comes from Keith Whitney.
I'll ask Keisha Lance Bottoms. You know, they keep talking about in 25 years the population here is going to triple. Am I the only one that scares the hell out of?
Well, as the mother of four, I think I'm contributing to this significantly. But it really is about generational planning. As we talk about where we are as a city and what our leadership has meant to our city, it's about not just making decisions for today, but for the next 20, 40, 60 years and so forth. And I think that's why it's more important than ever that we have solid leadership at the local level. As we look at the conversations we are having nationally about any number of issues, the things that really impact our day-to-day are decisions that are made by our city council and through the administration of the mayor. And so I think that it is extremely important that we continue to work with regional partners and that we be thoughtful and that we continue to be good stewards of our finances. That's why I'm very proud to have helped sponsor pension reform in the city, because it has given us a significant amount of money for us to help make decisions that really will make this city better, not just for today, but for tomorrow as well.
Thanks very much. And that is all the time we have for questions. Each candidate now has 60 seconds for a closing statement, and by random selection, Keisha Lance Bottoms, you get the first closing statement.
Thank you. Atlanta is a tale of two cities, and I am the only candidate for mayor who has lived and worked in both those places. I know what it's like to grow up in this city, the daughter of a single mother, struggling to make ends meet, struggling to keep food on the table and the lights on. But I also know what the promise is of this city and what's on the other side of it. I'm a graduate of Frederick Douglass High School, Florida A&M, and also Georgia State University College of Law. I mentioned that I have 4 children. They are the 4 reasons that I am running for mayor: Lance, Langston, Lennox, and Lincoln. When my mother faced very challenging times, there was a beloved community around me that made me know that there was something better on the other side of those challenges. I want this city to continue to be a beloved community for my children, but it can't be if it's not for all of our communities and families as well. That is why I'm running for mayor, and I ask for your support.
Thank you. Kathy Woolard, it's your turn for a closing statement.
Thanks, Dennis. I'm Kathy Woolard, and I'm fighting for ATL, affordability, transportation, and livability. As we've discussed, our city is going to triple in size in the next 25 years, and so we have to focus on how we're going to grow our city so that we have housing affordability in a range of choices, right? For homeless people, for kids just out of school, for people with different incomes and family sizes, and so seniors can age in place and continue to live in this city. We have to provide transportation options, everything from the last mile, sidewalks and bike lanes that work, that get you to transit, that get you throughout the region, and livability, schools that work, safe neighborhoods, arts and culture and parks, and deliver all of that now, because we are going to triple in size and we have to prepare our infrastructure for the future. And finally, we have to make sure that we have ethical government, because if our government isn't ethical, then we've got nothing. I'm Kathy Woolard. I'm fighting for ATL.
Thank you. Next closing statement comes from Michael Sterling.
Thank you so much, Dennis. I just want you to know that this race is about us against a status quo. It's about us against income inequality in our city. It's about us against sitting in traffic constantly in our city. This race is about us against educational access for all of our kids. It's about us making sure that every kid has access to a quality education in our city. It's about us making sure that the people in our city feel that they're being included in the promise of Atlanta. Atlanta, I believe that we can find our hope again, but we've got to be willing to take on the status quo, a status quo that has left us gridlocked in traffic and has left so many people behind in our city. I know that we can do better. You see, politics at its best calls on us to be hopeful about the challenges that we face every single day. And I believe that we can find our hope again if you and I will work together. My name is Michael Sterling, and I'd love to have your support as your next mayor of Atlanta. I will be a mayor that you can trust, and not a mayor who will smile in your face and cut you behind your back.
Thank you, Mr. Sterling. Peter Amon is now up for a closing statement.
We just actually witnessed a fairly dramatic event, which was Miss Norwood admitted that if she were mayor, she would actually break the law. And specifically, she said that if she were mayor, she would not have allowed for the cancellation of the procurement. Well, I don't know whether she is ignorant of the law, which is, of course, no excuse under the law, or whether she just thinks that she's above the law. But the fact of the matter is, the city procurement code is very clear. The head of procurement makes decisions about canceling RFPs or not. That's the only individual who can make those decisions. That's why every day when I was chief operating officer, I not only held people accountable, I investigated any instances of impropriety that even arose and had people fired in many cases, but I was also somewhat anal about following the code. That's why when there was a decision, I asked for it to be scanned and time-stamped and everything else. So it was very clear that before the meeting occurred, the decision had been made by the man who was allowed to make it.
Thanks very much, Ms. Norwood. You'll have time during your closing statement if you need it. Glenn Wrightson, though, has the next closing statement.
My name is Glenn Wrightson, and I'm running for mayor because I believe the check engine light is on at City Hall. I have specific ideas that I'd like to implement that are not these big programs that solve all the problems. When you hear about we're going to solve this and we're going to solve this and we're going to solve this, somebody's going to be disappointed. But I propose that we have a slogan in Atlanta, that Atlanta has heart. I propose we reduce the budget of the mayor's office. I recommend we eliminate plastic trash bags, grocery bags, that we restrict gas leaf blowers. Specific things. We need to have a real look at the employees at City Hall. What we need to do for the growth is to clean our house and prepare for the growth and make sure that the city government is functioning at optimum levels. Glenn Wrightson for mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wrightson. Kwanzaa Hall has the next closing statement.
Thank you to the press club. I've said this before. Atlanta doesn't need a white mayor, black mayor, gay mayor, or straight mayor. Atlanta needs a great mayor. A mayor who will put people and neighborhoods first, as I've done in the heart of the city. We've solved problems big and small for the heart of Atlanta, downtown, midtown, Old Fourth Ward, Inman Park. I'm going to bring back 50,000 new affordable units from Northside Drive to 285 down to Jonesboro Road. We're going to make sure that we keep you safe by not focusing on the petty crimes with marijuana possession, but focusing on the serious and violent crimes. I'm going to make sure that we fix the roads and the potholes and put a top 100 list of congestion problems in our city and focus on them one by one, like 10th and Monroe, 285 on Cascade to Lyndhurst, and also Northside Drive, areas that need our attention. Atlanta's been great at building buildings, but not so good at loving its people and loving its families. I'm Kwanzaa Hall, and I'll be everybody's mayor.
Thank you. Rohit Amanamachi, it's your turn.
Thanks. So, Rohit Amanamachi, I'm running because I felt that somebody needed to take a stand towards the people that have been in power for 10, 20 years, the people before me who are saying things that sound nice, they're saying things that we need to be doing for our city, but that we've been needing to do for our city for the past 10 or 20 years. Right now we're facing some of the biggest crisis situations that Atlanta has ever faced, with the income inequality being the worst in the country, and as the civil rights capital of the country, we should not be facing that situation. As well as the traffic and the housing, the lack of economic development on one side of the city, you can't deny that the people who have been in power, whichever level, have had their chance to do something about it and didn't. So I'm running because I think that the city is in a phase where the previous generation of leadership is ending and a new generation of leadership is about to begin. So vote for Rohit Amanamachi for mayor.
Thank you very much. And John Eves, it's your turn for a closing statement.
My Jamaican grandfather taught me, a man of words and not of deeds is like a garden full of weeds. This race is about leadership and integrity. I'm proud of my record in terms of leadership, overseeing the largest local government in the state of Georgia, representing 1 million people and also overseeing $1 billion budget, working with 15 different cities. Delivered great things. Grady Hospital saved that, criminal justice reform, transportation spots at $655 million. I'm proud about that, and doing all of that corruption-free. Integrity. City Hall is corrupt and it needs to be overhauled. If you were troubled like me this morning, hearing some of the responses of some of the folks on the dais about their situation, about integrity and ethics, I am deeply troubled. City Hall is corrupt It needs to have a new leader that will set tone at the top. I'm John Eves, and I will bring that type of leadership, and I will also bring integrity. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, and we go to the man right next to you, Vincent Fort.
We've already talked about income inequality in Atlanta being number one, income and mobility. City Hall has lost its way in dealing with those issues. City Hall has, for the last several years, last 7 or 8 years, been beholden to millionaires and billionaires and allowed Atlanta to become one of the most rapidly gentrifying cities in the country. We could talk about displacement-free zones, as Councilmember Bottoms has, and other gimmicks. But when Ms. Bottoms and other members of council and people who worked at City Hall had a chance to vote against the displacement of Atlanta citizens, particularly in the Peoplestown neighborhood, they voted to displace them. The city is displacing 30 families, including an elderly couple called Mr. and Mrs. Darden. They have no place to go. They raise their children, they raise their grandchildren in that house, and now they're going to have to leave the house they love.
All right, Senator, time's up.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Cesar Mitchell is next.
Well, thank you to the Press Club, and thank you to all of you who are watching at home. I'm Cesar Mitchell, and I'm running for mayor because I believe this city has incredible promise. I grew up in this city, the son of an Atlanta police officer and a school teacher right here in APS. They taught me the value of service. And even though I grew up after having my father pass with a mother who was single, she told us that the village is the village we want to be in. And this village wrapped its arm around us. I want to make sure that every child growing up in this city has a village around them so that they can know that they're going to get a quality education because City Hall is going to work with the school system every day in every way. I want to make sure our neighborhoods are safe because we have police officers who are in the community actively engaged with young people and senior citizens and everyone in between. I want to make sure that our city is passable. That means I want to make sure we have strong transportation, a quality transit system, and we use innovative solutions to make sure that you have access to mobility and access to the things that you need. I'm Cesar Mitchell, and I'm ready to lead this city. I provided strong leadership as City Council President, and I intend to provide strong leadership as Mayor. I'm Cesar Mitchell, and I want to serve as your Mayor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. And our final closing statement comes from Mary Norwood.
I'm running for mayor for you, for all of the citizens of Atlanta. I have served you for 3 terms. I have worked for 25 years. You know me. You know that I have solved your problems, large and small. I am running to give you a transparent, accountable, responsive government so that you will have a community that will thrive. I have been protecting communities and preserving neighborhoods for years. I want all of Atlanta to share in the prosperity that is coming with our next great renaissance in this town. I want every community to be safe, every community to be mobile, and to be connected to every other community. I want our businesses to thrive. I want our young people to thrive. I want our seniors to be protected. I will work for you, Atlanta, just as I have all these years. I welcome your support, look for your vote, and hope to be your mayor in 2018.
Thank you, Ms. Norwood, and we are already out of time. We'd like to remind voters, though, Election Day is November 7th. Early voting begins October 16th. That's this coming Monday. Many thanks to the candidates, our terrific panel of journalists, and the Atlanta Press Club for arranging today's debate, and to Public Broadcasting Atlanta for hosting us. I'm Dennis O'Hare, host of Morning Edition on 90.1 WABE. Most of all, thanks to you for joining us for the Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk-Young Debate Series. Have a great day.